Hello, this is Tyson with the Idaho Renaissance Fair Inc.'s YouTube page, and I am so grateful that you joined us today. What we're going to be talking about is one of the more famous poets of 1494. Now, I like to try and stay around Italy, but honestly, of this time, there isn't a ton of material in which to pull from. A lot of stuff was happening, but as far as big works that really stood out and really did something for the time for the next couple hundred years, there wasn't a lot. You can find smatterings of it, but because of how long ago it was, it is difficult to find good copies of anything. It's why I think there's only a small handful of the Gutenberg Bible left, the original print, and whatever is there, it's so old, it just hasn't done well. So the biggest thing that we do see are anything that's carved in wood or anything that may have been carved. It's why things like Leonardo da Vinci's art and Michelangelo and Raphael's art, all of that jazz, has survived and is so well known. People who were politically in mind or who may have been teachers or something along those lines, unless they had a really big discovery, we don't really know a whole lot about them because there wasn't an ease in writing anything. There wasn't an ease in really trying to preserve any of that history. It was difficult. And we're finding better ways of keeping it all alive now, but it's still difficult. And the items that we're trying to work with are becoming fewer and fewer. So, this particular person that I have chosen to kind of talk about today, his name is Sebastian Brant. Now, Sebastian was born in Strasbourg, and that's in Germany. And he was really, really big as far as his poetry was concerned. He was born in 1457 or 58. We're not 100% positive, in Strasbourg, as I mentioned. And he was educated. He was a very well educated man. He went to the University of Basel or Basel. I'm not 100% how you say it. But he went to the university there. He studied law. He studied literature and philosophy. And he was quite well known for it. And he was able to kind of pursue that avenue for a long time. And he eventually became a professor of all of that. Right around 1483, he became a professor and was teaching at the university. And by 1489, he had graduated both his canon and civil law. So he was able to act as a lawyer in all aspects. And that made him a very powerful figure, much as judges are now. You have to know the law in order to pass sentence on the law, etc. So Sebastian Brant, while he was still going to school and learning, he first really kind of came to public rise with some of his poetry and some of his other writings. He started writing in Latin because he was a devout Catholic. A lot of Catholics at that time that went into an education were doing their studies in Latin. And he found that by writing in Latin, his audience was extremely limited because where he was, the main language was Dutch, Germanic in origin. And so he started writing his literatures in German, in Dutch is how they describe it. And the common people that could read found his writing to be quite entertaining. And he wasn't necessarily going for that. It's a lot like popular satire these days. While they take serious subjects and put humor to it, there is a good moral behind it that they are trying to get across. And one of the biggest things that he noticed as he was getting educated and as he was going through and writing, he was noticing that the way that the church was run, because Protestants were starting to become a big thing. You got to keep in mind the Gutenberg Bible has been printed at this point. You have Martin Luther doing his thing in Germany. So he's seeing all of these, and being the devout, good Catholic that he is not supporting the Protestant movement. However, he doesn't think that the way that the church is handling the situation, the way that the local governments were handling the Protestant situation, was appropriate. And so in 1494, which is one of the main reasons I picked him, because I like to try and stay focused into this area, he wrote a satirical poem called Das Narrenschiff, which means the Ship of Fools. It was published in 1494, and he had a guy translate for him into English named Alexander Barclay. And honestly, Alexander would do this with a whole bunch of different works. He would translate popular works and make sure that they were available. And Sebastian Brant's Das Narrenschiff was translated into all common languages in Europe for the next couple hundred years, because it still applied what he was talking about with his satire. By after the first kind of writing of it, the reason we are so well aware of it, besides all of the reprints for the next 200 years, was he had these wood blocks made that became quite popular for the people around there, that had ships of fools. It would have a boat full of jesters, men dressed up as jesters, and in the mast there would be the two popes kind of fighting each other. And so it changed over time. Sometimes you would have the Antichrist and a pope fighting. Sometimes you would have leaders of countries fighting each other. It didn't really matter how it went together. The idea was the same. In his Ship of Fools that he wrote, it was all about this boatload of people that were on their way to the fool's paradise of Naragonia. And as far as my research has gone, Naragonia wasn't an actual place. That's what made it so foolish. They were just getting on the boat and going, and assuming there was a place to go to. And there's a lot more to it. I'll be honest though. It is a really, really hard read. At the time, the way that the English was written, it was not the same as how we write today. A lot of the words don't match up. A lot of the spelling is phonetic, and people didn't necessarily all write the same way. It's not like how we do it today. We all learn that if you're going to spell this, it's THIS. Where back then, if you said spell this, they could spell it THYN, they could spell it THEN, they could spell it THIN. Like, it, as long as you kind of got the gist of it, that's what counted, and that's what mattered. And in fact, in Alexander Barclay's novel, he actually apologizes for the way that he writes, because it was designed for any semi-educated person to read, and understand, and was not to the same standards as like what nobles would read, or the nobles' education, things like that. So back to Sebastian before we get into that, because I'll give you a sample of the Ship of Fools, and honestly I'll give you the example of Alexander Barclay's apology that he writes at the beginning, just so you can kind of get an idea of what you'll be running into should you decide you want to read this yourself. Because it was really popular, it lasted a very long time, and it made huge waves. So we will get to that. I'd like to finish talking about Sebastian first though. So he writes his Das Narrenschleff. He's done a whole bunch of other writings, and then by the time that 1501 kind of hit, that's when he really got out of writing, because he went into leadership. So Maximilian I named him an imperial counselor, and he earned the title of Count Palatine and was a judge for the imperial court at Speyer. And he was extremely influential. While he was a huge proponent of the Catholic Church, he didn't stop the Protestants from preaching and teaching in the city of Strasbourg. And so he was seen as very fair. People really appreciated and loved him for what he could do. and he was really big with Emperor Maximilian. He also had a very good, strong working relationship with Ferdinand II of Aragon, who was the man after their conquest of the Moors in Africa and the unification of Spain. He sent Christopher Columbus to go find the Indias and to establish a trade route. Of course, Columbus found the Americas, and everything kind of changed then too. But Sebastian was a huge, huge proponent of Ferdinand II because of his fight with the Moors. He was really worried about the Turks, and he was really worried about the Holy Land. And so he encouraged a lot through his political and leadership positions to kind of solidify and keep out the heathens and stuff like that. That was a very big stance of his, and it was supported by the people because they all felt the same way, especially as good Christians. It's why the Crusades were and how that all went down. So he was very, very religious and very, very respected. So that's kind of why he made such a standing. And there's not a ton of information on him. We know he was married. We know he had 7 children. And we know that he had a whole bunch of other writings as well, but none quite as big as The Ship of Fools. That really was kind of his crowning achievement as far as literature goes. And once he became a leader, he just didn't have time to really write anymore. We do have a bunch of letters that he traded between Maximilian and traded between a bunch of other famous people of the time, such as Ferdinand II and the likes. He taught a whole bunch of people who kind of was able to take his teachings and propagate them around, and he was very influential in the future that we kind of work now. It set the path for some of the things that we enjoy today. So that's why Sebastian Brant is a big name, and one that I highly encourage you to check out and read his stuff. There's amazing websites out there that take you through all of their stuff and some of the stuff that was translated for him. And I'll give you an example of that right now. So this is Alexander Barclay's Excuse the Rudeness of His Translation. And it's how he wrote it. So it hasn't been edited. They haven't changed a whole lot. And I'm going to warn you now, it's very difficult to read because it's not how it should be written. It's not how we write today. It's not unified. It's his way that he basically did the best that he could. And it is rough. So I'll read you one stanza. Go back, abase thee thy rudeness to present, to men announce to worship and honor, by birth or fortune, or to men eloquent, by thy submission excuse thy translator. But what I remember the canon behavior of men, I think thou ought to quake for fear of tongues in whose venom may thee dare. Yeah, it's very, very rough. And if you can get through it, or if you can find a modern translation, go with that. Because it will give you a headache after a little bit. So you need to have patience with it. It's good to see where we came from. So that was Alexander Barclay. And that was an extremely rough read of what I'm pretty sure he was writing. But be a judge for yourself. Go and check it out. There's amazing history. I just barely scratched the tip of what was going on, and I didn't even read any of the actual Ship of Fools. So I encourage you to check that out. That is our brief spotlight on Sebastian Brant. Look forward to more little historical highlights on other historical figures that are not nearly so popular as Da Vinci and the like, but who were paramount in shaping their world that in the end helped us shape our world. This has been Tyson with the Idaho Renaissance Fair, Inc. I hope your history is as fun as our history, and we will catch you on the next one. Huzzah!